make mistakes. Don't be afraid to. I think that's how I found my success. I think so often people get rushed into forging paths that they don't want to forge, and it's so easy to be caught up in a whole life where you're unhappy as a result. So yeah, be afraid to make a mistake, and multiple mistakes at that. That's the only way you're going to find what's right for you.
From Corner Jude and Dipia, Imene Msindiswe Umvelisen Meliswe Sidwe, formerly known as Wazi Madonsela, bringing you a show about creative entrepreneurs live from the landmark that not only birth SA street culture but also formalize the street hustle.
Corner Jude and Dipia, Msindiswe Umvelisen Uyena. Yo, if you're watching this, hope to see you at Corner Turns too, but most importantly, because we're hosting an event, we got an event expert. We got someone who's been doing it consistently. We got someone who's branching out, multifaceted creative, multi-hyphenate creative. I have Alex Michelsen.
Hey.
How you doing?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
Great.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming. Thank you for coming. Yeah. It's weird because I've known about Prime, but I didn't even know we did Prime till last year.
Yeah, it was something interesting actually. When I started, I had this this thing where I wanted to be separate to the concept of it. So I tried to push that brand as much as possible and tried to have me be as invisible as possible. And obviously with the increase in kind of influencer marketing, as it were, I decided to be my own influencer marketer. So then I kind of took more interest in myself, pushing myself more, where I'd previously kind of just put myself in a box, tried to hide myself, which was a bit odd, but yeah, we move.
How does one go about, because your story is very interesting. Mm-hmm. You want to throw a birthday party, but you don't want to call it a birthday party.
Yeah.
So you create an event name for this birthday party that ends up being Prime.
Being this crazy, cohesive concept that works so well.
Consistently, something that you've done for weeks in a row. I don't think you've gone a month without a Prime, if I'm not wrong.
For 8 years, I don't think I've gone more than a month without a Prime. Probably maybe 15, 16 days max.
How does one go about into the mindset of creating an event? Let's say I'm trying to throw a party tonight, I have a venue that has a bar. How do I throw a party?
It's interesting and it's difficult. I think you have to have the right intention for sure. I think at this point it's getting known that a lot of people are throwing parties. It seems like this thing that people do, which is great, but I think intention is also very important. And I'm if another person does a hip hop and R&B party, I feel like the audience is going to throw up. I think you need to see what the gap is and move to it versus seeing where people are doing well. Because I've noticed, even when you look at Strictly Soul, who are doing super well, I admire what they've been doing so much, like Akio, great. But when you look at what they do, when they take their breaks to do stuff in Europe and everything like that, then suddenly there's all these parties that pop up that are the exact same, that just were waiting for that little break. And I'm just why didn't you just look for a gap? You could have done that and you wouldn't have to wait for someone to kind of take a break. You could exist. And then, the market could be so much fuller and so much more wholesome.
Yeah.
I think there's room for everyone if people just apply themselves, because we all have interests. So why would we disregard our separate interests to focus on one that someone else has already focused on? Unless, of course, we're bringing in a unique take.
You go into eventing, right?
Yeah.
It's free, then you start charging.
Yeah.
What's that transition like?
It's daunting. I dragged my heels to do that because I was so comfortable in how things were. Even though it wasn't benefiting me, I was creating the space, and that in itself was so fulfilling. Then to move to a space where I was oh shit, I gotta worry about money now. I've got to get an income, I've got to pay people, I've got to do so much more than just this thing where it's a bunch of homies throwing a space, or kind of creating a space where people can enjoy and meet, network. Then it became something so much more intentional, which I definitely appreciated more, because now I'm I can't mess about. I was learning so many things that I hadn't learned previously in terms of spacing events, which day to throw it on, who to book, how do I space out the bookings that I'm kind of making, and how do I create this consistency in terms of not just events, spacing, but also in terms of the lineup itself. Do I want to keep it mixed genre? Do I want to kind of have a more focused core and then kind of have it expand out? There's so many things, or do I want to have it slightly different each time so that each experience is unique? So yeah, it was very interesting to kind of go from that like free party where I feel like there was less of an expectation, because obviously when you don't pay for something, you can't expect anything. But when you do, there's this heightened sense of entitlement, not in a good or bad way, but that you expect something. You know, there's a standard that needs to be upheld, and when that lacks, that's when people are way more vocal. I mean, we see this every time, like TikTok, where it's like people complaining about DJs, or if it's like Twitter, people complaining about everything. You know, it's interesting.
Yeah. You now start charging, then you start exporting the event.
Mm-hmm.
What was that process like?
Very exciting, actually. I've been wanting to come to Joburg forever. I think 2018, 2019, I was like certain. And then COVID hit, and obviously I had to take steps back. I wanted to leave my day job, but things weren't secure in events, so I couldn't risk that. But then eventually it got to a point where I was like, okay, cool, I'm gonna stay at this job and it's gonna hold me back, but this job is also not a career job. So I'd have to take that risk, and I have to kind of, you know, gamble with my passion and be like, okay, no, this is my career now.
Yeah.
And I've done that. I've moved here, and I've been welcomed with open arms, I feel, and it's been great. But obviously before I did that, you know, it was just like I could do this, I could fail, and I could look like an idiot. But at the same time, I feel like, you know, you look back when you're 50, 60, and you're like, shit, like I should have done that thing sooner. And I definitely feel that, but I think everything I've learned since the 2018-19 period, when I discovered or realized I wanted to move here, you know, those little lessons in between helped me be so much more successful and intentional when I did come here.
Mm. You know, earlier this year and last year, we were doing a cycle, right? We called it Cycling Corner. Mm-hmm. And I'd noticed there's a trend within the ticket buying where first 2 weeks, it's like here you move 5, 10, 15, then eventually you get to like 25. Yeah. And then the last 5 days is when like there's a
huge surge.
And then the day of event, then there's people complaining, even worse.
In terms of what, like the ticket
pricing? Ticketing, where it's like, yo, I want to come, I wish I couldn't buy the ticket earlier, Mm-hmm. How do you deal with that, especially when you have to get into pricing? Because a lot of people hosting events as well, mm-hmm. they also start feeling that uncertainty towards the build-up of the event, because now you need to pay DJs deposits, you're not having as many people, you don't have as much money depending on the ticketing mm-hmm. website you use. You don't have fluid cash at that time.
No, exactly, and all of that money only reflects after the fact, you know?
3 days.
Exactly, so you have to be really intentional and like intelligent with what you do with the money that you get from events. So, you know, often I just, you know, it's just like, okay, cool, that is gonna, you know, be towards this like deposit or whatever, if that's the case. Luckily, I'm at a point where, you know, I can have like brand assistance, but also even that, it doesn't reflect immediately. So then it's like, oh, there's this big act that I want to get. And, you know, you get to a point where you can kind of build relationships with bookers, for example, where it's like understood that like, okay, cool, you're paying part of the deposit or not the entirety before. But for the most part, I don't think there's many people that will allow you to kind of get away with like just paying like a deposit and then the rest after the event. It really just depends ultimately on like your relationship and, you know, that booker knowing that like you're good for it. But even then, I'm sure people kind of like take advantage of that, and you know, there's a lot of time where that payment, like it's like 2-3 weeks after the event, and the booker's kind of hitting that person up like, hey, what's going on? But yeah, it's very interesting how that works.
How have you dealt with the finances of eventing? Because the current theory and understanding is that events don't make money unless you have a sponsor.
That is true, but also false. I think you have to be, yeah, I don't know. I'm trying to think of like the exact way to kind of word it, but I do think that often if it's a collective and there isn't a very intentional or very like uniform way in dealing with funds for the most part, especially if there's multiple people involved, there's the risk of things being mismanaged easily. Because again, like then you're looking at like your receipts and you're like, oh, what was that? That's definitely not related to events. But that's also thankfully why I deal with myself. I don't have a team. I do everything internally. You know, like I've got to a point where, you know, I outsource photography. I have like people helping me with like posters and things like that. Whereas before I used to do the photos myself before I could afford to. I had like a film camera. I would take photos of people at the event. I would use that for social media, which I also did myself. Yeah, I did the posters myself, or I had like friends help. The posters were like not the best though, but you know, like you make do with what you have, and with that, I guess it also sharpened my eye in terms of like what looks good, what doesn't, and that's kind of really helped me in terms of like directing things going forward. When I do have someone capable, and I'm like, okay, cool, let's save time. That doesn't look good. That doesn't work. We go that way, and then you know, you make your life so much easier, even though you're not like, you don't necessarily have someone who's like fully involved like that in terms of like the running of it, but even if it's just like receiving commands and doing everything way more efficiently.
Does it ever get overwhelming? Because you're the booking agent, you have to oversee design, you have to make sure marketing is executed, you still have to oversee these photos post-event, and you still have to liaison with everyone on payments, make sure everyone is still involved.
Yeah.
How do you keep going in that moment when it's like, yo, it's just one Alex, and
Yeah.
then still go again 2 weeks later?
Yeah, it's really difficult. I guess just as things have grown, I've allowed myself to kind of detach a little more and like give more away in terms of kind of like delegation. But yeah, like it would be super overwhelming. Sometimes it still is. Like I do other work as well. Like I model, I DJ other gigs and like corporate gigs every so often, and it was also quite taxing. Even the content creation, which I'm doing too, that's also like really taxing because it's these constant deadlines, and then it's just constant deadlines on top of constant deadlines on top of constant deadlines, and you know, you learn to sometimes just let go, and you're like, this thing isn't as much of a priority. Let me put that back a bit, and you just kind of realize in terms of what you have on your plate, what is the most important, and then you kind of just work with that based on the energy you have and the ability within the context of like, you know, the time available. But yeah, sometimes I do miss deadlines, and sometimes I do, lapse, and it's really important to do that so you know how you react and how you recover.
How do you keep it new? Like, do you monitor micro trends? What's the whole thing?
So yeah, like on the micro trends thing, I think sometimes you don't have to keep it new. I think sometimes you can take it back. And that's what I've been realizing with conversations on micro trends, because I've been doing these below core events, right? And I've been reading all of these interviews or like these like content pieces or thought pieces on like how micro trends are dying or how below core was last season. And I'm like, anyone who says that has no relation to the culture itself. Because if you knew what below core was, it's not a t-shirt, shorts, and sambas, you know? As much as that is a good fit, it was rinsed, and there are other Adidas shoes that look good with that, or there's like other pairs of like pants that look good with it. It doesn't have to be a Brazil jersey either. And it gets really frustrating that like people think they could put culture in a box like that. Whereas I feel like below core, for example, as long as football exists and as long as people exist within match day culture, that's going to always be a thing, you know? And to kind of minimize culture to the extent that it feels like something that you can just capitalize on, that I hate, because this is something that I've been wearing since I was a kid, you know? I got this like Germany Euro home kit, and I love that shit. That was my Christmas present for my mom. It was the best thing I ever got. And since then, I've always worn like football jerseys. It's a huge thing in like Joburg style. It's a huge thing in Cape Town style. And like beyond that as well, you know, as long as football exists, match day culture exists, that will. And it just sucks to me when I go online and I see someone be like, microtrend this, microtrend that, and it's like dead. And it's like, no, it's so much more than that.
Speaking of micro trends and people's perspectives of things,
Yes.
do you feel seen in the creative community for the work you do?
Often not. I think considering the fact that I've been doing this for 8 years, when I look at how people react to things, and how I'm only sometimes getting opportunities now, I think I've been dismissed entirely. I don't know, I feel like sometimes if I was maybe in Joburg sooner, or if I just was nicer to people, I feel like that's also a thing, like this networking thing where you have to kind of brown nose. I don't like that.
Same, bestie.
I wanna off myself. I'd rather work harder and get less, but know that I did it the right way. Like, it's really frustrating to me because, you know, at the end of the day, I could be doing this and it could end tomorrow. And then someone's gonna be like, that football jersey guy. And I would throw up because I've been working my ass off for 8+ years, you know. I've been going out, I've been like unintentionally studying everything and everyone, and to think that like my style, for example, can be put in a box where someone's just like, oh, it's just baggy clothing, or it's just like football jerseys, or it's just like, I don't know. I think I'm so much more than my social media says. And I don't know, I feel like people find it easier to digest when they see you in a singular form. Like, so often when people speak about what I've done, they don't do enough research, so they'll never see I did photography at the beginning, like I was interested in that. They'll never see or like ask like, oh, what type of music are you interested in? Oh, you must just like hip hop and R&B because you DJ that. And it's like, no, I'm like so much more than that. But at the same time, if I'm throwing hip hop and R&B events, I'm not gonna be throwing down a jazz set, you know? And I love jazz. I go to jazz fests religiously since like 2016. And like, it's frustrating that as a creative, your existence is only what can be used in conjunction with a brand. Whereas like obviously that also dictates things in terms of algorithm stuff too, because now you're like, I really like what I'm doing there, but you know, the engagement was whack, the insights were terrible, but that's what I resonate with. So it's like, it's almost like you really have to be so intentional with your time and energy to not also diminish your interests yourself, because now you're like, I can't like that because it's not getting the reaction it should. Like, I should still like that, but I just need to be maybe smarter with how I put it out there. Or I just don't at all and I keep it close to myself. But it does suck that you can be so interested in, you could have such a valid approach and opinion on something, but no one cares. And you know, that's just how it is, you know, like you're creative, but also your value is in the eyes of the people who, you know, will benefit from whatever you're doing.
There's something you once mentioned. You said it's a fight between brand and humanity.
Yeah.
How have you balanced that? Because 7 years in, you're not getting the recognition or appreciation, rather, let's say, from the wider creative community. Your community's still there, keeps growing, but in terms of quote unquote the executive level of it, right? How do you still now open yourself up to say, you know what, now that you see me 5 years later, now that you open these opportunities that you should have gave me long ago, how do you still allow yourself to work with these brands and still find a middle ground?
I mean, you've just got to trust that what you do and what you create will continue to have the impact it does. And if it doesn't, you adapt, because that's just how you survive. Like, I've seen many parties come and go, and there'll be many parties that will come and go in the future. So it's difficult. I think you really just got to stay true to yourself. And I've been saying that a lot lately, and it almost sounds like something that's been rehearsed, but it isn't.
Speaking of stay true, boiler room.
No, honestly, literally.
How was that? Because you build these parties, now one of the biggest parties is recognizing you, they're like, yo, let's partner.
Yeah.
How do collabs work with you?
Well, collabs work with me in the case that like I'm like, this is what I'm doing, not I'm gonna do this based on what you want me to do. I think that's also very important. I think so often I've been told that brands want to come on board, but then they want to kind of like drop certain things in their direction, you know, like, that act I like, that theme I like. And like, if they vibe with it, then by all means. But I think brands also need to understand that when they want to work with you, you control everything, because they are just winning off your success and your opinion and your insights. What they bring is just money, you know, and you know, muscle, that helps. But at the same time, I think they also need to understand that without you, they would be a lot further from the culture than they think they would. And I think brands really need to kind of just like switch up and just understand fully that, again, you know, without us, they're nothing. But again, many brand people I do like working with, and many brand people who are doing cool shit with the culture, you know, like shout out Hayden with like Puma, he's doing so well. But then there are other mini brands who are also not doing things and like kind of just riding a wave or trying to kind of like influence it in a negative way. And then with that, you kind of take people off their course anyway. So it's like you wanted to work with them, but now you're shifting it in a sense where they're not doing what they were meant to be doing, but they've got that brand attached. So then are they really winning long term? Because that singular bag versus the multiple bags they would have got over the long term if their course hadn't been corrected. That is also something to consider. Yeah.
You 8 years in, you've done festivals, you've done everything. Are you planning on creating your own festival? Are you planning on, you know what, let's get our own venue now? Because we do this thing so religiously, and also sometimes you're trying to book for that weekend, that venue's already booked, this, that.
Funny enough, no. It was something I wanted for a long time, but now I see the value in intimacy. I don't want a 6,000 person event. I am happy with like 300 to 500. I think that's where you can really feel the audience and you can connect. I think anything bigger, there's just so many more risks, whether it be safety. Actually, it's more just safety I worry about. But I don't know, I feel like there's a detachment when you have these big stages and these fences and security between you and you as the performer and the audience. It's just, it's not something I'm enjoying. But I do think at the beginning, for sure, you know, like I'd worked with Boiler Room, I'd like worked with these brands, that like it felt like the momentum was shifting towards there. But honestly, I think based off that, and even just like decentralizing my event from creatives in the sense that like I think creatives can be very cliquey, right? And it's in a very negative way as well. I don't know if you saw, there was this reel that Sandy Blaus put out, Miss Blaus, put out like a week or two ago, speaking about how uncomfortable they felt in Joburg. But I feel like it extends, you know, to Cape Town beyond. You know, like creatives have their cliques, they work together, and sometimes to create something bigger, you must downsize and you must move away from those people and create a space where you can create an audience and you can create just an environment and a community where people feel like they can be themselves. And I think sometimes you almost have to take that knock to recover, because long-term people want to feel comfortable, people want to feel genuine, and whether, you know, people need a course correct from their cloud chasing, that, you know, they'll see the light eventually. But I think sometimes, yeah, it's frustrating, but I don't know, intimacy is the one for me. I see the value in it, like if you have a venue and you have a bar, like great, you make a lot of money, but I think also you rinse yourself out, and the ability to go long-term declines because you're doing too much. There's oversaturation within yourself, and you know, then it's like you're literally fighting yourself, you're literally allowing so many more people to come up, which is also great, but at the same time at your expense, where you can just be more intentional, space out your events, make them more special, make them more of an occasion, and then with that, you know, you're only gonna win.
What's the risk factor like? Because you'll drop a poster that there's Prime in 2 weeks in Joburg, but there's Prime tomorrow in Joburg, and there's Prime next week in Cape Town, and 2 weeks from Cape Town, plus the month after that. Why do you take those steps? Do you not feel like at some stage it gives people the option not to attend this time?
Funny enough, no. I think I'm making them interesting enough. I'm like spreading my lineup out enough. Like I'm bringing the odd, very interesting headliner when I can afford to, based on like brand involvement. Like I think it can be very easy to do that if it's every week, for sure. And I felt that for a bit in Cape Town as well, which is why I took steps back. But at the same time, I think with my current spacing and like my intention, my kind of use of themes, if I do, because it doesn't have to just be a theme thing, because I find with that as well, people kind of are quick to jump on something you're doing and then also in turn rinse it. So, you know, like with Glowcore, for example, I did like one in Cape Town, one in Joburg, and I let it sit because I was like, this is cool, but I want to do so many other things too. So let me not just do this every 3 months, 4 months, despite like the triple hypebeast feature. You know, that can come again if it's meant to. But at the same time, I think, yeah, like you have to create this value that people see and feel. And with that, whether your event is every week or every third month, you know, they'll come. But I do think for myself as well, because my health was taking knocks, because I was just in the club so long. Like I barely drink, I don't do drugs, but it's just the constant late nights. And then having to be on it the next day in terms of social media, admin, all of that, it catches up. So obviously in my head, I was like, okay, cool, I could do this, you know, once every week if I had to. But I think it's so much smarter to, you know, for my health and obviously the, you know, internal longevity of my brand because of my increased health, to just like space things out a bit more. Like, is anyone really gonna be that mad that they missed that 5th Prime that month? Like, I think it's better to just think about the long term more, and I've been doing that more and more lately.
Yeah, You think about the long term, you've figured out the method for now of what's working, what's not working. You've started looking at the market, about seeing the things come, seeing the things go. You're building this thing so well. What would you say is your word to the youth?
Wait, sorry, Mike?
Your word to the youth.
My word to the youth.
22-year-old Alex hosting a party for his birthday.
Jesus.
That camouflaged into an event property.
I don't know. Make mistakes. Don't be afraid to. I think that's how I found my success. I think so often people get rushed into forging paths that they don't want to forge, and it's so easy to be caught up in a whole life where you're unhappy as a result. So, yeah, be afraid to make a mistake, and multiple mistakes at that. That's the only way you're gonna find what's right for you. But otherwise, you're gonna maybe find instantaneous or long-term success in a career you don't like, and you're gonna live a very unhappy life. I'd rather live month to month, you know. I think there's more joy in that. We often look at very successful and wealthy people on, you know, the Heisnobites, the hype beasts, the, you know, all these like online publications, and like, I want to be them, I want to get seeded that high-end product, I want to get that Y3, I want to get all of these things. But, you know, these things, they don't stick with you, you know, on your deathbed. That Y3 t-shirt's not going to be that comfortable. You know, it's those memories and those experiences.
Yeah. You've diversified Prime away from the party, but still bringing it back to the music, doing the films, doing the merch. Why was that push?
I always just wanted to show my interest beyond just music and events. I like fashion, I like streetwear, I like things, so why not show it? I mean, I think one of the dumbest and most exciting things I did was like rent the Labia Theatre in Cape Town, and I did like a Donda listening, you know. It was like, it was fun. And it was odd also because it was like during COVID and like tickets sold out. And it was like half full, and I was just like, this is so ridiculous, but I didn't care because I did this cool thing that I never thought I'd be able to do. And just, yeah, incorporate music listings into my events. Like, this is something I plan to expand on more, but like with the artist as I grow. And there's just like, there's so many things that I'm yet to touch on. So it's hard. I think that's also why I understand more and more the need to delegate, because these are things that are being put on the back burner because I'm so present. Whereas if I had taken steps back, or if I do take steps back, it's so much easier to just be like, oh, there's that project I've been wanting to kind of get back on. I can, because I have the capacity. Whereas like now I'm like, oh, I didn't do that social media post at like between 9 and 12. I didn't make that payment I was meant to make at 9. I got to do it at 2 now. You know, that whole day is gone. Whereas like I could have been so much more intentional and like, oh, that's a project I want to do. Let me reach out to them. Let me chat to their booker. Let me see availabilities. Let's like work. So yeah.
What's the one question you wish you were asked in an interview?
I don't know. I'm pretty happy with the question so far, actually. I just want, yeah, I don't know. I like talking about these things. I get very passionate about it. But I often feel like, yeah, I like it when things are researched. And like, I mean, you've done your research, which is great. I think they got to a point where, even at the beginning, it kind of ties into me trying to like hide myself. I would like reject invitations for like interviews and like kind of coverage. People would like ask to take photos of my event. I said no. Whereas like now I'm like, you know, put myself out there, like have a conversation.
There's a thing we should touch on quick. The battery might die whilst we say this. But you mentioned being 30 and your approach to life right now.
Yeah.
What has significantly changed over the years? Because I think like as young creatives, every year we enter a new stage of doing things business-wise and our perspective. Yeah. What has kept you in the knowing that, you know what, next year is going to be a better year? Because sometimes we lose hope when things are not moving at the speed we want.
There is no guarantee. There really isn't, and it's the scariest thing. There is no guarantee that things are going to get better, and that sucks. But I think it's the understanding that, like, you know, we can be happy and we can still make things work, because if we have that genuine enthusiasm towards what we're doing in our craft, and we're not like pocket watching careers, because that's, I feel like, what people have started doing, then I think there's so much more that we can do and so much more happiness we can find. And I feel like as brands are becoming more open to working with people who are doing things genuinely, whether you have 50K followers or 500, which is also great. I'm happy that brands don't just need to work with those like influencers at the very top, because that's just not genuine. Those people are so far detached from reality and culture that it's kind of like, why are you still working with them? But yeah, I definitely think that like creatives need to just like, or 22-year-old Alex just needs to, you know, stay consistent, stay true, just not worry as much about the noise in the background, and like creatives that don't want to network with you, or people that act like they're bigger than you, because those people will show themselves to be smaller long term, which is something I've also come to find. You know, people who moved like they were bigger than me at the beginning, or I don't see them anymore.
That's
You know?
so true. That's, those 10K, 15Ks, don't worry about them.
Exactly.
Just do your thing.
Exactly. And you know, I'm sure I've acted like I'm bigger than people as well. But at the same time, I do feel like I make every move as smart as I can. You know, it's difficult. Like sometimes you have to see the value in saying no. And then sometimes you also have to kind of like make yourself smaller and see the value in saying yes. It's all just so difficult, but we have to ultimately trust ourselves in our decision making, and like know that like, hey, we made it this far. Maybe that next decision isn't so difficult.
Yeah, let's end it there. That was beautiful.
Thank you.
We made it this far. Maybe that next decision is not so difficult.
Right.
Alex, thank you.
Thank you for having me.